Glad to have you join us on Business Now. I am Perpetual Fasami Peter. And now the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria has raised the benchmark interest rate from 14 to 15.5% in order to tame the rising inflation rate. This represents a 150 basis point increase from the 14% rate voted during the last MPC meeting in July. At the end of the MPC meeting on Tuesday, CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele told journalists that 10 members voted in favor of the rate hike. Inflation exceeded the 20% mark in August, fueling speculations that the CBN would further raise the rate. The cash reserve ratio, CRR, which means the share of a bank's total customer deposit kept with the central bank as cash, was also raised to 32.5% from 27.5%. It, however, retained the liquidity ratio. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has prescribed a mix of fiscal, monetary and structural reforms to help lower soaring food inflation in Nigeria, Ghana and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The multilateral lender declared that food prices tend to be higher in countries with weaker fiscal management and elevated public debt, noting that those with stronger monetary policy frameworks are better at curbing direct and second-round food price inflationary pressures, and in turn controlling overall inflation. Nigeria's food inflation stood at over 22% in July, while Ghana's was 32.3% over the same period. In a new blog post, the IMF attributed the spike in the prices of locally sourced foods in Nigeria, Ghana and other sub-Saharan African countries to domestic supply disruptions, local currency depreciations, as well as higher fertilizer and input costs. The multilateral lender, which disclosed that staple food prices in sub-Saharan Africa surged by an average 23.9% between 2020 and 2022, the highest since the 2008 global financial crisis, noted that this was commensurate to an 8.5% rise in the cost of a typical food consumption basket. The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, in its money and credit statistics has revealed that money supply M3 in the economy has increased to 49.36 trillion naira as of August 2022, a 9.21% increase or 4.16 trillion naira year to date when compared with the 45.19 trillion naira reported in January 2022. This is against the backdrop of mounting federal government borrowings to finance the country's huge budget deficit. The CBN money and credit statistics showed that as the federal government continued to borrow, money supply has maintained month-on-month trajectory growth. M3 is a measure of the money supply that includes broad money M2 as well as large time deposits, institutional money market funds, short-term repurchase agreements, repo, and larger liquid assets. Analysts have attributed the surge in money supply to federal government borrowing to finance the budget, hike in inflation rate, and numerous interventions by the central bank. The World Bank Group will be raising $127 billion for mini-group power funding by 2030. The bank said it will be leveraging development partner funding and government investment to crowd in private sector finance for the project. It explained that solar mini-grids could provide high-quality, uninterrupted electricity to nearly 500 million people in unpowered or underserved communities and be a least-cost solution to close the energy access gap by 2030. To realize the full potential of solar mini-grids, the World Bank noted governments and industry must work together to systematically identify mini-grid opportunities, continue to drive costs down, and overcome barriers to financing. Infrastructure Vice President, World Bank Ricardo Politi, said more than ever, solar mini-grids are a core solution for closing the energy access gap. Nigeria's Debt Management Office, DMO, has stated that Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio is 23%, which is still within the country's self-imposed limit of 40%. The Director General of the DMO, Patience Oniha, said this on Tuesday during an executive course on budgeting and fiscal responsibility organized by the Fiscal Responsibility Commission in Abuja. She also added that one way to reduce budget deficit is to grow revenues and to prioritize expenditure and cut waste and leakages. Oniha noted that a larger percentage of Nigeria's borrowings were concessionary loans from multilateral and bilateral sources, citing that Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio was 23%, which is still within the country's self-imposed limit of 40%. She added that the figure was also within the World Bank and IMF recommended limit of 55% for countries within Nigeria's peer group and 70% for ECOWAS countries. Data from the federal government on Tuesday indicated that the collapse of the national electricity grid that occurred the preceding day led to the crash in power generation from 3,713.1 megawatts to 38 megawatts. Industry figures obtained from the Ministry of Power showed that power generation on the grid as at 6 a.m. on Monday was 3,713.1 megawatts, but this plunged to 38 megawatts around 10:51 a.m. On Tuesday, Nigeria suffered another nationwide power outage on Monday morning after the national electricity grid collapsed for the 7th time in 2022. Following the development, power consumer groups called for sanctions against operators or firms culpable of the incessant grid collapse that had characterized Nigeria's electricity system since this year. The report further stated that industry figures seen on Monday indicated that power generation on the grid had risen to a peak of 4,100.80 megawatts on Sunday. It dropped to 3,713.1 megawatts at 6 a.m. on Monday. The Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, says it has commenced a probe into Nigeria's perpetual crude oil underperformance, stressing that the matter could be deeper than oil theft. In a statement by the Commission's Chief Executive, Mr. Gbenga Komolafe, the NUPRC stated that letters inviting oil and gas firms in the country had already been dispatched. According to the Chief Executive, the Commission, during the inquiry, will particularly be interested in the mode of operation of the companies in relation to their approvals as per their operational licenses, the level of conformity with the technical provisions and production terms. In addition, the statement said that the NUPRC will also be looking at the company's level of investment to enhance capacity utilization, the challenges they are facing, especially those contributing to the current unacceptable situation. We'll take a commercial break now, and when we come back, we'll bring you stories from Africa and the rest of the world. Stay with us.